The cemetery was quieter than I expected for a man of his stature. Raindrops fell with gentle persistence onto the mahogany casket suspended above the freshly dug earth, the water beating before sliding off in crystalline rivulets. I stood beneath a black umbrella in the third row, not among the immediate family but close enough to observe the tears streaming down faces I recognized from childhood memories, faces that seemed to know something I didn't. Warren Emerson Spencer had been, as far as I knew, merely a family friend, a wealthy businessman who occasionally appeared at holiday gatherings with expensive gifts and warm smiles. He had no wife, no children, at least none that my mother had ever mentioned. His visits grew less frequent as I entered my teens, until they stopped altogether when I turned 18. I hadn't seen him in nearly a decade. So why was I here? My mother had insisted, her voice uncharacteristically brittle over the phone when she called to tell me of his passing. He would have wanted you there, Daniel, she had said, refusing to elaborate further. I watched her now, seated in the front row, her spine rigid, her gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the casket. She hadn't shed a single tear, but something in her demeanor suggested a weight far heavier than mere grief. I didn't know then that her carefully constructed reality, and mine, was about to shatter. The rain intensified as the minister concluded his remarks, and I shifted uncomfortably, unaware that in less than 30 minutes, in the wood-paneled office of Warren Spencer's attorney, I would discover that everything I believed about my life was built on an elaborate deception. I didn't know that the man being lowered into the sodden earth was not just a family friend but my biological father. And I certainly couldn't have predicted that this revelation would lead me to sue the woman who had raised me. Some truths, I would soon learn, are worth more than $35 million. Mr. Daniel Hayes? The voice belonged to a silver-haired man with tortoiseshell glasses perched low on his nose. He extended his hand as I entered the claustrophobic waiting area of Caldwell and Frost, attorneys at law. The building was tucked away on a side street in downtown Boston, the kind of discreet establishment that old money gravitates toward. Yes, that's me, Malcolm Caldwell. I was Warren's attorney for over 30 years. His handshake was firm, businesslike. Please, follow me. I glanced around the room at the other attendees from the funeral, searching for my mother's face, but she was nowhere to be seen. When I told her I'd received a call requesting my presence at the reading of Warren Spencer's will, her face had gone ashen. I have a migraine coming on, she had murmured. I'll wait in the car. As Caldwell led me down a corridor lined with portraits of stern-faced men in judicial robes, I felt distinctly out of place in my off-the-rack funeral suit. I was a middle school science teacher who drove a 10-year-old Subaru. What possible reason could Warren Spencer's attorney have to summon me? The conference room held only 3 other people. An elderly woman I recognized as Warren's sister Margaret, a middle-aged man in an impeccable suit who was introduced as Warren's business partner, Richard Fenton, and a young woman I'd never seen before, identified as Eliza Thornfield, Warren's personal assistant. Before we begin, Caldwell said, arranging papers before him, Mr. Spencer left specific instructions that this video be played. A screen descended from the ceiling, and suddenly Warren's face filled it, older than I remembered, more lined, but with the same penetrating blue eyes that I'd always found mildly intimidating. The timestamp in the corner showed the recording had been made just 3 months ago. If you're watching this, I've finally lost my battle with pancreatic cancer, Warren began, his voice strong despite the gauntness of his face. I've always believed in addressing matters directly, so I'll get right to it. He cleared his throat, and his eyes seemed to look directly at me through the screen. Daniel, I am your father. The words hung in the air like suspended particles of dust. I felt my breath catch, certain I had misheard. I know this comes as a shock. Your mother, Catherine, and I had a relationship during the year she separated from Thomas Hayes. When she discovered she was pregnant, she chose to reconcile with Thomas and asked me to stay out of your life. I respected her wishes, with one condition, that I be allowed some peripheral presence, to at least know the man you would become. My mind raced backward through childhood memories, recalibrating each one through this new lens. Warren Spencer at my 10th birthday party, watching from the edge of the yard as Thomas, the man I had always called Dad, taught me to swing a baseball bat. Warren's overly generous Christmas gifts. The way my mother always tensed slightly when he visited. I've watched you grow into a fine man, Daniel. Your choice to become a teacher, to shape young minds rather than pursue wealth, speaks to your character. It's a choice I respect deeply, though it differs from the path I took. Warren's image shifted slightly, his expression hardening. What I cannot respect is deception that serves only greed. Catherine agreed that upon my death, you would be told the truth and receive your rightful inheritance. Recent events have led me to believe she may have reconsidered this agreement. Hence, this recording and the legal documents Malcolm will share with you today. My head spun. Rightful inheritance? Recent events? What was he talking about? I leave the majority of my estate, valued at approximately $70 million, to be divided equally between my biological son, Daniel Hayes, and my sister, Margaret Spencer, with the condition that Daniel's portion be placed in a trust until such time as he is made aware of his true paternity. Richard Fenton's face darkened, and Margaret Spencer dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. To Richard Fenton, my business partner, I leave my stake in Spencer Innovations, with the stipulation that 10% of annual profits be donated to educational initiatives for underserved communities. The attorney paused the video. Mr. Fenton, that equates to roughly $15 million in company shares. Richard nodded curtly, but I barely registered this exchange. My mind was still grappling with Warren's words. I am your father. The video resumed. To my loyal assistant, Eliza, I leave my vacation property in Nantucket and a sum of $5 million. Eliza's soft gasp was the only sound in the room. And now, Daniel, for the difficult part. Warren's expression became grave. 6 months ago, I learned that your mother had been systematically undermining my attempts to establish a relationship with you. Letters I sent that you never received. Invitations extended but never delivered. She has known for over a year about my diagnosis, yet chose not to facilitate any meaningful connection between us before my death. I felt numb, disconnected from reality, as if I were watching a movie about someone else's life. In the bottom drawer of my desk at home, you'll find evidence of this deception, including DNA test results confirming our relationship, which I obtained with your unknowing assistance. Remember that charity swab event at your school last spring? That was my doing. I did remember. A foundation supporting cancer research had come to collect cheek swabs for a bone marrow donor program. I'd been one of the first to volunteer. I tell you this not to turn you against your mother, but because you deserve the truth, and because there may be attempts to contest this will. Malcolm has been instructed to support you through whatever decisions you make regarding this revelation. Warren's image seemed to soften, vulnerability showing through his composed exterior. I regret not fighting harder to be part of your life, Daniel. No amount of money can compensate for that failure. I hope you'll use your inheritance to build the life you want, not the one others expect of you. His voice grew fainter. I would have liked to have known you better, son. The screen went black, and silence enveloped the room. I sat frozen, my world tilting on its axis. Mr. Hayes, Caldwell said gently, sliding a folder toward me. These are the DNA test results Mr. Spencer referenced, along with documentation of your inheritance. After taxes, it amounts to approximately $35 million. $35 million. The number was incomprehensible, abstract. All I could think about was my mother sitting in her car outside, and the web of lies she had apparently spun throughout my entire life. There's one more thing, Caldwell added, his tone careful. Your mother contacted this office yesterday, claiming to have documentation showing that Warren had promised her half of his estate in exchange for her silence about your paternity. We have no record of such an agreement, and if it exists, it would not be legally binding, as it would constitute fraud. My stomach clenched. The portrait of my mother that was forming was unrecognizable, calculating, mercenary. I need some air, I managed to say, rising unsteadily from my chair. Caldwell nodded. Of course. Take all the time you need. But be aware, Mr. Hayes, that your mother may attempt to access these funds. I would advise consulting with a personal attorney as soon as possible. The rain had stopped by the time I stumbled out of the building, the late afternoon sun breaking through clouds to cast long shadows across the wet pavement. My mother's Mercedes was parked at the curb, and I could see her silhouette through the tinted windows. For a moment, I considered walking past, disappearing into the city to process everything I'd learned. But 35 years of filial obligation propelled me forward. As I opened the passenger door, her perfume enveloped me, Chanel No. 5, the same scent she'd worn throughout my childhood. Suddenly, it smelled cloying, suffocating. Daniel. Her voice held a note of apprehension. What happened in there? I turned to look at her, this woman who had packed my school lunches, who had cheered at my graduations, who had apparently lied to me every day of my life. Why don't you tell me, Mom? Or should I even call you that anymore? Her face crumpled, not with surprise but with resignation. She had known this day would come. She had just hoped to be prepared for it. Daniel, please. It's complicated. Let me explain. But as she reached for my hand, I noticed something that stopped me cold, a document partially visible in her open handbag. I could just make out the letterhead, Sattler and Bloom, estate attorneys. She was already planning her next move. The rain returned overnight, pounding against the windows of my apartment with an insistence that matched my racing thoughts. I hadn't slept. How could I? The foundation of my identity had been uprooted, exposing a tangle of lies beneath. At dawn, I drove to Warren Spencer's estate, my biological father's home, where Eliza had agreed to meet me. The sprawling Tudor-style mansion sat on 5 acres in Wellesley, its manicured grounds now glistening with raindrops in the early morning light. He spent a lot of time in this study, Eliza said, leading me into a wood-paneled room lined with bookshelves. A massive desk dominated the space, its surface meticulously organized. The drawer he mentioned in the video is locked, but he left the key for you. She handed me a small brass key before tactfully withdrawing, closing the door softly behind her. The bottom drawer required some force to open. Inside lay a leather portfolio, its surface embossed with the initials WS. With trembling hands, I lifted it out and placed it on the desk. The first document was the DNA test, confirming with 99.9% certainty that Warren Emerson Spencer was my biological father. Seeing the scientific proof in black and white made the reality inescapable. Beneath the test results were dozens of envelopes addressed to me in Warren's distinctive handwriting, letters spanning years, none of which I had ever seen. I opened one at random, dated from when I was 16. Dear Daniel, your mother tells me you've developed an interest in astronomy. I've enclosed a book that changed my perspective on the universe when I was about your age. Perhaps it will speak to you as well. I've also bought 2 tickets to the observatory in Cambridge for the meteor shower next month. I'd be honored if you'd join me. With admiration, Warren. I remembered that meteor shower. I had wanted to go, but my mother had scheduled a family dinner that night that I couldn't miss. Had she intercepted this invitation? Discarded the book? The thought made me physically ill. Letter after letter revealed similar patterns, offers to help with college applications, invitations to graduations that I'd been told he was too busy to attend. Congratulations on achievements he'd somehow known about despite his supposed distance from my life. Then I found something unexpected, a manila envelope containing photographs. Warren standing beside a woman I recognized as my mother, much younger, her head thrown back in laughter. Another showed them on what appeared to be a sailboat, her hand resting on his chest, his arm around her waist. They looked happy, in love. At the bottom of the drawer was a small velvet box. Inside nestled a platinum ring with a single emerald, an engagement ring, never given. The final item was the most damning, a series of emails printed and organized chronologically, exchanges between my mother and Warren over the past 18 months. In them, she acknowledged his illness and reminded him of their arrangement. As his condition worsened, her emails became more insistent, culminating in an explicit threat. If you persist with this plan to tell Daniel everything and leave him your fortune, I will contest the will with evidence that you agreed to compensate me for maintaining your secret. Remember our conversation in Aspen? I have proof. Warren's final reply was brief. Catherine, I've respected your wishes for over 30 years, but I won't take this truth to my grave. Daniel deserves to know his origins, and he deserves his birthright. Whatever proof you think you have cannot override a father's right to acknowledge his son. I'm sorry it's come to this. I sat back in Warren's leather chair, the weight of these revelations crushing me. My mother had not only denied me a relationship with my biological father, but was now seemingly prepared to steal my inheritance through fraudulent claims. The study door opened, and Eliza appeared with a cup of coffee, which she placed silently on the desk before me. He wanted to tell you so many times, she said softly, especially after his diagnosis. He was afraid he'd run out of time. Why didn't he just tell me anyway? Why honor an agreement with someone who clearly wasn't honoring it herself? Eliza hesitated. He believed in keeping his word, even when others didn't. And she paused, choosing her words carefully. He was afraid of losing what little connection he had with you. Your mother made it clear that if he violated their arrangement, she would ensure you never spoke to him again. The manipulation was breathtaking in its calculation and cruelty. I thought of all the times Warren had attended my school events, how he had always maintained a respectful distance, his gaze following me with what I now recognized as paternal pride. There's something else you should know, Eliza added. The charity swab event at your school wasn't entirely his doing. He donated to the foundation, yes, but the DNA test was private. He was already quite ill and wanted confirmation before making you his heir. I nodded, oddly grateful for this clarification. At least not every interaction had been orchestrated. As the morning wore on, I continued to sift through Warren's papers, constructing a timeline of deception that spanned my entire life. By noon, I had reached a decision that felt both terrible and necessary. I called Malcolm Caldwell. "I need your recommendation for a litigation attorney," I said when he answered. "I'm going to sue my mother." The lawyers advised against meeting with my mother before filing the lawsuit, but I couldn't bring myself to take such drastic legal action without at least attempting to understand her motives. So 1 week after the funeral, I found myself sitting across from her at the dining table where I had eaten countless family meals, the portfolio of evidence between us. She looked older than she had at the funeral, the carefully maintained facade of the wealthy doctor's wife showing cracks. My father, Thomas, the man who had raised me believing I was his biological son, was at a medical conference in Chicago. I wondered if he knew the truth. "I want to hear your side," I said, keeping my voice level. "Before this goes any further." She smoothed an invisible wrinkle from the tablecloth, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light. I remembered Warren's letters mentioning my 16th birthday, how he had wanted to establish a college fund for me. Had those gifts been redirected? Had they funded my mother's increasingly luxurious lifestyle over the years? "It wasn't about the money," initially, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Warren and it was intense, but brief. When I discovered I was pregnant, I had already decided to reconcile with Thomas. Our marriage had been struggling, but we'd built a life together. I thought we deserved another chance. And Thomas? Does he know I'm not his biological son?" Her hesitation told me everything. He suspected, but never asked directly. It was easier for everyone to maintain the fiction. "Easier?" I echoed, incredulous. "You denied me a relationship with my biological father for over 30 years because it was easier?" "I was protecting our family." Her voice rose defensively. Warren was brilliant but difficult, consumed by his work, prone to dark moods. He wasn't father material. Thomas gave you stability, a normal upbringing. I opened the portfolio and withdrew the emails. "And what about these? Were you protecting our family when you tried to extort money from a dying man?" Her face flushed. "That's not fair. We had an understanding. Warren promised to provide for me in exchange for my discretion." "Discretion?" I laughed bitterly. "Is that what we're calling a lifetime of lies? And now you're planning to contest the will with some fabricated agreement?" "It wasn't fabricated," she countered, rising to retrieve a folder from the sideboard. "We did have an agreement, signed in Aspen 15 years ago. He promised me half of whatever he left you." She slid the document across the table. It appeared authentic, a private contract on legal letterhead, signed by both Warren and my mother. "If this is real, why didn't you show it to Caldwell?" "Because it's not the kind of agreement a court would look favorably upon," she admitted. "It's essentially payment for concealing paternity, but it is legally binding between the signatories." I studied the document, noting the date, March 2010. Something clicked in my memory. This was right after Warren's company went public, wasn't it? When his net worth quadrupled overnight. My mother's silence was confirmation enough. "So when he suddenly became one of the richest men in Massachusetts, you decided your discretion was worth more." The pieces were falling into place. "That's why you started intercepting his letters around the time I turned 16. You weren't protecting me from a difficult man. You were ensuring your claim to his fortune." "You have no idea what I sacrificed for this family," she hissed, her composed demeanor cracking. "Thomas's practice barely stayed afloat during the recession. Our lifestyle, your private education, that apartment in Cambridge during college, where do you think the money came from? Warren was happy to provide as long as I kept his secret." The implications were staggering. My entire upbringing, the privileges I had taken for granted, had been bankrolled by the very man I was never allowed to know as my father. "Did you ever love him?" I asked quietly. Her expression softened momentarily. "Yes, once. But love isn't always enough, Daniel." "And what about me? Did you ever consider what I might want? My right to know my own father?" "You had a father," she snapped. "Thomas loved you as his own. He still does. That wasn't your decision to make. You robbed me of 35 years with Warren, and now you're trying to rob me of the only thing he could leave me." "Half," she corrected. "I'm only asking for what was promised to me." I stood up, gathering the portfolio. "I'm filing the lawsuit tomorrow. Fraud, tortious interference with inheritance, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Caldwell thinks we have a strong case, especially with the DNA evidence in those emails." Fear flickered across her face. "You would do that to your own mother? Drag our family through a public scandal? You did this, I said evenly. Not me. You had decades to make it right. Even when Warren was dying, you chose greed over truth. As I turned to leave, she called after me, her voice breaking. Daniel, please. We can work this out privately. Think of Thomas. This will destroy him. I paused at the door, the weight of her manipulation still attempting to assert its grip. You should have thought of that 35 years ago. Walking to my car, I realized I was shaking not with anger, but with grief for the relationship I never had, the conversations never shared. The father I had only truly met through his final message and the artifacts of his thwarted attempts to connect with me. My phone buzzed with a text from Eliza. Found something in W's personal safe you should see. Can you come by tomorrow? Whatever additional revelations awaited, I knew there was no going back to the life I had believed was mine. The only path forward was through the ruins of deception, toward whatever truth remained to be uncovered. Eliza met me at Warren's estate the following morning, a small metal box in her hands. This was in his personal safe, she explained. The combination was your birth date. Inside the box were memory cards labeled meticulously by date, the earliest from 25 years ago, the most recent from just weeks before Warren's death. Alongside them lay a handwritten note addressed to me. Daniel, if you're reading this, then Malcolm has honored my wishes, and you know the truth. These are recordings I made for you throughout the years, thoughts I wished I could share with you directly but couldn't. Perhaps they will help you understand the man your father was, beyond the public persona or whatever impression your mother may have conveyed. With love, your father. We loaded the earliest card into Warren's computer. His image appeared on the screen, younger than I had ever known him, anxiety evident in his expression. Daniel turned 10 today, he began. Catherine allowed me to attend his birthday party as a family friend. He's remarkable, inquisitive, kind, already showing an aptitude for science. He has my eyes and my mother's smile. Warren's voice caught. I wanted to give him a telescope to nurture that curiosity I see in him. Catherine said it was too expensive, might raise questions. So I brought a model rocket kit instead. He seemed to like it. The recording cut to Warren in the same location but clearly months later. Daniel's science project won first place at the regional fair. I funded the competition through the Spencer Foundation so I could attend without suspicion. He didn't need my help. His project on water purification methods was entirely his own work. I'm told he's talked about becoming a scientist. Like father, like son, I suppose. Hours passed as Eliza and I watched Warren's chronicles of my life from a distance, his pride in my achievements, his frustration at being kept at arm's length, his gradual resignation to the role of peripheral figure. The more recent recordings showed a man increasingly aware of his mortality, wrestling with regrets. Daniel started teaching 8th grade science last year, Warren noted, now visibly thinner, his hair graying. Not the career path Catherine wanted for him, she pushed for medical school, like Thomas. But he's following his passion. I respect that enormously. In the final recording, dated just 3 weeks before his death, Warren appeared gaunt but determined. The oncologist says it's a matter of months now, possibly weeks. I've made my decision. Daniel will know the truth after I'm gone. Catherine is furious, threatening legal action. He sighed deeply. I should have fought harder years ago. That's my greatest regret, not the fortune I built, not the companies I created, but my failure to be the father you deserved, Daniel. The only consolation I have is that you've become an extraordinary man despite my absence, perhaps even because of it. As the screen went black, I sat in stunned silence. The portrait these recordings painted was of a man who had loved me from afar, who had orchestrated what small involvements he could in my life while honoring an agreement that grew increasingly corrupt over time. He set up a scholarship at your school last year, Eliza said softly. Anonymous, but specifically targeting students interested in environmental science, your specialty. Another connection I had never known about. How many more were there? The lawsuit against your mother, Eliza ventured. Are you sure that's what you want? It's not about the money, I said, surprising myself with the truth of this statement. $35 million was an incomprehensible sum, but it paled in comparison to the relationship I had been denied. It's about accountability, about acknowledging what happened. I made a decision in that moment, one that felt both right and necessary. I need to talk to Thomas before this goes any further. He deserves to hear the truth from me, not from lawyers or gossip. Thomas Hayes, the man I had called Dad for 35 years, returned from Chicago that evening. I met him at the small breakfast nook of my childhood home, the same place he had helped me with homework throughout my school years. My mother was conspicuously absent, having retreated to her sister's house after our confrontation. She told me, he said without preamble, placing 2 fingers of whiskey before each of us. About Warren. About everything. I braced myself for anger, for betrayal, but his expression held only a deep sadness tinged with something like relief. Did you know? I asked. All these years. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass before answering. Not with certainty. But I suspected. The timing of your birth, after our reconciliation. Certain physical traits that didn't match our family. Why didn't you ever say anything? Thomas, Dad, smiled wanly. By the time my suspicion solidified, you were already my son in every way that mattered. A DNA test wouldn't have changed that. And your mother seemed determined to maintain the narrative she created. I chose peace over confrontation, even when she was taking money from Warren, using his guilt to fund our lifestyle. He winced. I turned a blind eye to the source of certain improvements in our circumstances over the years. It wasn't my proudest choice. We sat in silence for a long moment, 2 men renegotiating their relationship in the wake of revelations neither had sought. I never meant to hurt you, he finally said. Whatever your mother's motivations, mine were simple. I loved you as my son from the moment I first held you. I still do. I know, I said, and meant it. Thomas Hayes might not have given me his DNA, but he had given me his time, his values, his unwavering support. This doesn't change that. I'm not filing this lawsuit to reject you. But you are going forward with it? I nodded. She had choices. She chose deception, repeatedly, even when Warren was dying and wanted to make amends. There have to be consequences for that. Thomas looked pained but nodded. I understand. And I won't stand in your way. He hesitated. But Daniel, whatever happens legally, she's still your mother. That relationship is worth salvaging, if possible. I wasn't sure I agreed, but I appreciated his capacity for forgiveness. It was one of the qualities that had made him a good father, regardless of biology. The lawsuit was filed the following week. The press caught wind of it almost immediately, the estranged son of tech magnate Warren Spencer suing his mother over a multi-million-dollar inheritance. The headlines were sensational, the reporting often inaccurate. I declined all interview requests, focusing instead on understanding the empire Warren had left me half of. Under Eliza's guidance, I toured Spencer Innovations facilities, the research labs developing sustainable energy solutions, the educational foundation funding STEM programs in underserved communities. I met scientists who spoke of Warren with genuine respect, not just for his business acumen, but for his vision of technology as a force for social good. He restructured the company 5 years ago, Richard Fenton explained during one such tour. Shifted our focus from profit margins to impact metrics. Some board members thought he'd lost his mind, but he was adamant. What's the point of accumulating wealth, he said, if it doesn't create a better world for our children? Our children. The phrase struck me. Had he been thinking of me specifically? Of leaving a legacy that would make me proud? 3 months into the litigation process, my mother's attorney requested a mediation session. The mountain of evidence against her, the intercepted letters, the emails threatening Warren, the recordings documenting his thwarted attempts to connect with me, had made her position increasingly untenable. We met in a conference room at Caldwell and Frost, the first time I had seen her since our confrontation at the family home. She looked diminished somehow, the carefully constructed facade of the society matron crumbling under the weight of public exposure. I'll withdraw my claim to the inheritance, she said without preamble, and acknowledge publicly that Warren was your biological father. In exchange for? My attorney tensed beside me, prepared to reject whatever demand followed. In exchange for nothing. Her voice wavered slightly. The truth is, I've already lost what matters most, your trust. I studied her face, searching for the manipulation I had come to expect, but found only exhaustion and regret. Why now? I asked. Why not continue fighting? She slid a folder across the table, medical records. Hers. I don't have the luxury of time for protracted legal battles. Stage 3 ovarian cancer. The irony isn't lost on me. The revelation should have softened me, perhaps, but I felt only a distant sadness. I'm sorry about your diagnosis. Truly. But it doesn't erase what you did. No, she agreed. Nothing can. But I hope someday you might understand that I thought I was protecting a future for us. For our family. By denying me my father? By stealing what he wanted me to have. By securing our place in a world that can be cruelly indifferent to those without means. She gestured toward the window, beyond which lay the affluent streets of downtown Boston. Your idealism, your dedication to teaching, Those are luxuries, Daniel. Luxuries afforded by the very privilege you now condemn me for securing. There was a twisted logic to her argument, I had to admit. My chosen career, my life choices, had been made possible by financial security I had never questioned. Security that, I now knew, had come partly from Warren's silent contributions. That doesn't justify the extent of your deception, I said, or what you plan to do after his death. No, she conceded. It doesn't. The mediation concluded with a settlement agreement. My mother would relinquish all claims to Warren's estate and issue a public statement acknowledging the truth about my paternity. In return, I would not pursue further legal action against her. The document was signed without fanfare, a sterile end to a lifetime of secrets. As we prepared to leave, she caught my arm. Daniel, there's something else you should know. The contract I showed you, the one from Aspen, it wasn't entirely fraudulent, but it wasn't what I implied either. Warren did agree to provide for me financially, but not in exchange for hiding your paternity. Then why? For your education. For opportunities he wanted you to have, but couldn't provide directly without revealing our secret. The agreement was that I would use his money for your benefit, not mine. She looked away. That part one didn't honor. Not completely. The admission was stunning in its belated honesty. Why tell me this now? Because despite everything, I don't want you to think your father was the kind of man who would buy silence about his own child. He wasn't. He was better than that. Her eyes met mine. Better than me. 1 year to the day after Warren Spencer's funeral, I stood again in the cemetery, this time alone. The headstone was simple despite his wealth, his name, the dates of his birth and death, and a single line. The greatest discoveries await the curious mind. I placed a small telescope on the grave, not an expensive one, but the kind a parent might give a child to nurture an interest in the stars. A symbolic gesture for the gift I never received. The lawsuit had been resolved months ago, the scandal fading from public interest as newer dramas captured the media's attention. My mother was responding well to treatment, her prognosis cautiously optimistic. Thomas had filed for divorce but maintained a relationship with me that, while altered, remained fundamentally intact. We were navigating new territory together. As for the inheritance, I had spent the year learning about wealth management, sustainable investing, and philanthropic impact, guided partly by Eliza and Richard, partly by the principles I discovered in Warren's business records and personal writings. The result was the creation of the Daniel Spencer Foundation for Educational Innovation, focusing on bringing cutting-edge science education to schools in low-income communities. The first grants had been awarded the previous month to 10 schools across Massachusetts, including the one where I continued to teach. I had kept my job, despite my newfound wealth. The classroom was where I belonged, where I could see the spark of curiosity ignite in young minds. It was, I had come to understand, the most meaningful legacy I could honor, not the money or the Spencer name, but the passion for discovery that had apparently run in my blood all along. My relationship with Warren now existed entirely in the artifacts he had left behind, the recordings, the letters, the evidence of his attempts to be part of my life. I had spent countless evenings in his study, now mine, piecing together the man through his possessions and remembrances. In some ways, I knew him better in death than I ever had in life. The irony wasn't lost on me that my mother's deception had inadvertently shaped me into the kind of person Warren seemed to admire, someone who valued education over accumulation, impact over status. Had I known from the beginning that I stood to inherit millions, would my path have been different? Would I have chosen teaching? Or would the allure of joining Spencer Innovations have diverted me toward business instead? These questions had no answers, of course. The past couldn't be rewritten, only understood and, perhaps, forgiven. I hadn't reached that point with my mother yet. The betrayal ran too deep, the wound still too fresh. But as I watched her fight her own battle with mortality, I recognized that holding on to anger served neither of us. We spoke occasionally, cautiously, rebuilding not the relationship we had pretended to have but something new, based on hard-won honesty. A light rain began to fall, droplets beating on the polished granite of Warren's headstone. I remained a moment longer, thinking of the parallel universe where Warren Spencer had been simply Dad, where I had grown up knowing his brilliance and his flaws firsthand, where Sunday dinners and graduation ceremonies and first heartbreaks had been shared openly rather than observed from a careful distance. That life would never be. But the one before me now held its own promise, a chance to merge the best of both fathers' legacies into something uniquely mine. As I turned to leave, I noticed an elderly woman approaching with a small bouquet of lilies. Margaret Spencer, Warren's sister, my biological aunt. We had developed a tentative relationship over the past year, bonding over shared stories of the brother she had known intimately and the father I was still discovering. "I thought I might find you here today," she said, placing the flowers beside my telescope. "He would have been pleased by what you've done with the foundation." "I hope so," I replied. Sometimes I feel like I'm having a one-sided conversation with him, trying to guess what he would think or say. Margaret smiled, the expression remarkably similar to the one I sometimes caught in my own reflection. "He was prouder of you than you know. Even from a distance, even without acknowledgement. He kept a file of newspaper clippings every time your school's science program was mentioned, every academic award. It was his most treasured possession." We stood in companionable silence, this woman who shared my DNA and my sense of loss, if not my specific grievances. "Will you join us for dinner on Sunday?" she asked as we began walking back toward the cemetery gates. "Richard and Eliza will be there. We've been going through some of Warren's old research journals. There are concepts there that might interest you, educational applications of technology he never brought to market." "I'd like that," I said, and meant it. As we parted ways in the parking lot, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. Not completion. The story of my fragmented identity and complicated inheritance was far from resolved, but acceptance of its ongoing nature. The lawsuit had been necessary, a stand for truth and accountability, but it had only been the beginning of a much longer process of reclamation and redefinition. Warren Spencer had given me life twice, once through biology, and again through the truth he insisted upon from beyond the grave. My mother had taken much from me through her deception, but she had also, inadvertently, given me the freedom to become my own person, unburdened by expectations attached to wealth or family legacy. And Thomas Hayes had given me the steadfast love of a father, regardless of DNA, a gift whose value no inheritance could match. As I drove away from the cemetery, I thought about the lecture I would give my students on Monday about genetic inheritance, environmental factors, and the complex interplay between nature and nurture that shapes who we become. It was a lecture I would deliver with new insight, having lived its principles in the most personal way imaginable. The rain intensified, drumming on the roof of my car, still the same 10-year-old Subaru, despite my changed financial circumstances. Some continuities were worth preserving, small anchors in a life that had been fundamentally transformed. I was Daniel Hayes Spencer now, legally and spiritually, a hyphenated identity reflecting the hyphenated truth of my existence. Son of 3 parents, one who gave me life and then watched from afar, one who raised me without biological connection but with genuine devotion, and one who had orchestrated a lifetime of deception out of some complex blend of love, fear, and greed. The inheritance I had fought for was not merely financial. It was the right to know my own story, unvarnished and complete. The right to integrate all the fragments of truth into a coherent whole. The right to decide for myself what legacy to honor and what to leave behind. In the end, perhaps that was the most valuable bequest of all, not the millions in my bank account, but the freedom to author the next chapters of my life with full knowledge of where I had come from, and therefore a clearer vision of where I might go. The truth, as they say, had set me free. Not without cost, not without pain, but with an authenticity that no amount of comfortable fiction could provide. And for that, I was grateful to the father I had only truly met at his funeral, the man whose final act of paternal love had been to tear away the veil of lies and insist that I be given what was rightfully mine, not just his fortune, but the truth of my own existence. Some inheritances, it turned out, were beyond price.